So, Netflix's new Sandman show has just dropped, based on Neil Gaiman's incredible genre-redefining comic book series. At time of recording, I haven't watched it yet, but I'm optimistic about this one. From the trailer, it looks like they've nailed the dark, fantastical tone of the comics. The cast looks incredible, Jenna Coleman looks incredible. The storyline appears to be following events from the earlier entries in the series, and did I mention Jenna Coleman is in it and playing a female version of John Constantine?
Did you wish really hard? Shut up, not like that.
All that said, I always hold on to a slight bit of trepidation when it comes to Neil Gaiman adaptations. I am a massive fan of his writing, and clearly I'm not alone considering how many of his stories have been adapted for film and television. Some successfully, some not so much. So, before reviewing Sandman, I wanted to break down why I think Neil Gaiman's unique writing style is so hit and miss when it comes to reworking the material for the screen, and to possibly answer the question, what is the best Neil Gaiman adaptation? Hopefully by the end of this series the answer will be Sandman. Let's start off with one of the earliest examples of Gaiman's writing for the screen, the 1996 BBC series Neverwhere. Neverwhere is an interesting place to start because it was actually written for the screen first and then later reworked into a novel. In that sense, you can't really count it as an adaptation, but looking at the differences does give us an insight into how Gaiman himself views the subtle changes between writing for the screen and for a novel. Dreamt up by Gaiman and British writer and comedian Lenny Henry, the original idea was to make a show about the homeless in London. Neverwhere is the story of Richard Mayhew, a young Scottish businessman who's moved to London and after helping a seemingly homeless woman called Dor, becomes entangled in the politics of a magical world beneath the streets of London, fittingly called London Below. The story plays out as a fantastical murder mystery / treasure hunt. Richard and Dor, accompanied by a colourful cast of characters, must piece together, both with physical pieces and pieces of information, the puzzle behind who murdered Dor's family. The strength of the story for me was how tangible London Below felt. A combination of light and dark, beauty and dirt, wonder and danger make the hidden community of magical misfits feel like an actual part of the historic city. And Gaiman clearly did his research for this, as the story is full of little details and references that, as a Londoner myself, I really enjoyed.
They hold it in different places, moves around. And to get to the place where it'll be tonight, we have to go through a really nasty neighbourhood.
And where would that be?
Knightsbridge.
Knightsbridge.
At the heart of this impression is the treatment of the residents of London Below by those above. When Richard becomes involved with the underground world, his life on the surface, his job, his relationships are all erased. People he considered friends have forgotten him, and strangers don't acknowledge his presence. This is all too uncomfortably accurate to the general treatment of homeless people in London. And this unfortunately relatable thread acted like an anchor for me to travel through this magical world. Because the cynical truth is, if homeless people were magically disappearing through walls or talking to rats, it's not like many people would notice. Now let's talk about the TV show, made up of 6 episodes, all of which were directed by Dewey Humphreys. The most generous way I can describe the TV show is as a product of its time. Watching it in 2022 is interesting, but more as a history lesson into what TV used to look like. In the show's defense, the production of Neverwhere was plagued with problems. Scenes and characters from Gaiman's original story had to be cut due to locations falling through, episodes overrunning, and even an actor breaking their leg whilst filming. Gaiman stated that for him, writing the novel was his way of reasserting control over the story. Every time something went wrong, he would say to himself, "It's okay, I'll put it back in the novel." For budget reasons, the series was shot on video instead of film, with the intention to filmize the footage in post-production. Therefore, scenes were lit and shot in a certain way, but unfortunately the decision was later reversed, resulting in the show's unique look. Considering all this, the book is definitely my preferred version of the story. The self-aware storytelling and over-the-top dialogue come across as whimsical and entertaining in the novel, but in the harsh light of digital video, it feels a tad cheesy and melodramatic, especially by today's standards. But if you enjoyed the book, the show is definitely worth a watch out of curiosity, if nothing else, and to see Peter Capaldi play an angel called Islington. We can imagine how frustrating it must have been for Gaiman not to see his true vision come to life on screen. But equally, the same limitations are faced by every adaptation. It sounds like Neverwhere had a bumpier production than most TV shows, but the best way to learn to swim is by jumping into the deep end. And I think Neverwhere had a big impact on Gaiman, and is likely why he took such an active role in later adaptations of his work. Speaking of, let's jump forward a decade to 2007. I was 11, Apple was introducing the first iPhone, and Amazon was introducing the first Kindle, which you could use to read Neil Gaiman's 1999 novel, Stardust. Pretty proud of that segue, I'm not gonna lie. Stardust started out life as a 4-issue comic miniseries illustrated by Charles Vess and published by DC Comics in 1997. The following year, the story was published as a picture book, and then in 1999, Gaiman's publishers encouraged him to release Stardust as a conventional novel. Talk of a film adaptation began pretty much as soon as the illustrated story was published, but after an initially unsuccessful development process by Miramax, with Gaiman himself writing the story treatment, the author recovered the rights once they'd expired and held on to them for 7 years, repeatedly refusing many offers to develop a film. Director Matthew Vaughn began talks with Gaiman about an adaptation in 2005, and later that year, Paramount Pictures acquired the rights with Vaughn directing, writing, and producing. Gaiman himself took on the role of a producer and recommended Jane Goldman to contribute to the screenplay. Fun Gaiman fact, Jane Goldman and her husband Jonathan Ross appear in one of Neil Gaiman's short stories, The Facts in the Case of the Disappearance of Miss Finch. It's a fun little London-based story if you're interested. The film and book both follow Tristan Thorne, or Tristran in the books, a shop boy from a local village called Wall, named because of the stone wall outside the settlement that separates our world from the magical land of Fairy. Tristan/Tristran is infatuated with a girl called Victoria, and vows to cross the wall to retrieve a fallen star in return for her hand in marriage. But instead of finding a lump of space rock, the star turns out to be a young girl called Yvain. Goldman and Vaughn do a brilliant job of converting the source material for the screen. There are certain subtleties from the book that get lost, but what you gain in the trade-off is more cinematic spectacle. There are 3 major differences between the book and the film, the first of which is the pacing. Certain details are simplified in the film version, such as the protagonist's family. In the book, Tristan has a stepmother and sister, though is unaware of his true heritage, whereas the movie makes things much simpler, having just Tristan and his dad living together alone. Similarly, when Tristan crosses the wall in the novel, he spends a few days travelling through an enchanted, malicious forest with a small hairy companion who eventually gives him the candle he needs to get to the star. The film cuts all this and simply has Tristan's mum leave him with a Babylon candle when she abandons him as a baby. This way we can skip ahead to the most interesting part of the story. Obstacles like Yvain's broken leg in the book are made less extreme in the film to keep the story moving at a good pace. The second major difference is the extended sequence with Captain Shakespeare and the lightning catchers. This is little more than a few pages in the book and acts simply as a way of Tristan and Yvain getting down from the clouds after using the last of the Babylon candle to escape the Witch Queen. The film, however, cleverly uses this journey as an opportunity to symbolise Tristan's character growth. We get a montage of him learning how to sword fight, working with the crew to capture lightning during a storm, and most importantly, his developing relationship with Yvain. And it's worth mentioning here the film's change in focus to Tristan's coming-of-age story compared to the novel. There is much more attention on Tristan being a shop boy in the movie, and his insistence that he's not a shop boy.
I was just working in a shop.
I think this was included to make the character more relatable to younger audiences who might be stuck in similar dead-end Saturday jobs, but dreaming of achieving more. His relationship with Veronica is also subtly different. In the books, it's clear that she is only humouring Tristran's romantic notions, which is why when he returns from his adventures, she feels responsible and guilty about his disappearance, and in the end both amicably agree that they have fallen in love with other people. The film version of Veronica is a bit more two-dimensional, and seemingly does attach her affections to whoever can bring her the best gift as an offer of marriage. This way Tristan gets to actively reject her when he returns home, not to mention both confrontations with Henry Cavill's character Humphrey act as visual bookends for Tristan's growth. The overall effect is a less subtle, more dramatic way of showing how the character has changed. And that's exactly what you want in an adaptation aimed at a young audience. The final big difference is the ending, and this is where I think a lot of Neil Gaiman adaptations deviate from the books. I've always found the conclusion to his stories to be understated yet satisfying. The ending in the books is more of a clever revelation than an epic confrontation. Yvain and the Witch Queen have a subtle chat in which the former reveals that now she has given her heart to Tristran, it's no longer of any use to the witches. Most of the satisfaction comes from the revelation of Tristran's royal heritage, and his mother's freedom being granted when a prophecy is fulfilled. The moon shall lose a daughter during a week where 2 Mondays come together. The moon's daughter being Yvain, and the 2 Mondays being Veronica marrying Mr. Monday the shopkeeper. Though I love this ending, I have to admit it'd make a pretty boring climax to a blockbuster. And again, props to Goldman and Vaughn for coming up with such a creative final confrontation. The voodoo doll drowning, the lightning canister, the puppet sword battle, all so good I'm prepared to forgive the blindingly cheesy conclusion to the conflict. Call me old-fashioned, but I personally like to see my witches burnt, impaled, or melted. But we're talking about a movie with a walking, talking fallen star, so I'm not about to get precious. Though I admit to preferring the novelization of Stardust, I'm aware that this is probably because I read it when I was a bit older and could appreciate the nuanced storytelling, whereas an 11-year-old me would definitely have been demanding to know what happened to all the sword fighting at the end. And we'll talk more about endings in the next part when we discuss the childhood scarring adaptation of Neil Gaiman's Coraline. So subscribe if you want to see me mentally dig up all those repressed memories. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Now that that video's done, I can go and binge Sandman.